In this video, I'm going to show you how you can create a graphic or an image and turn it into multiple sizes of that graphic. Now you'll have to edit each one a little bit differently, but this is really useful if you are posting images on social media. And it's also good for things like responsive web design. So in social media, whenever you post to the different social media platforms, they all use different image sizes. So Facebook might have one image size and Pinterest uses a different image size. Usually Pinterest images are longer, where Facebook is more rectangular, vertical, or squared. So it's really good to know how to do this. We're going to use artboards, and we're going to set up different artboards, and then we can export those artboards out into our image files. Now this is also good for responsive web design, because if you create a website for a desktop, it's going to be different than one for mobile. And so it's really great to be able to come in here and create these artboards, and you can do one in HD desktop view and one for your mobile and one for your tablet. And you could lay out your web design, and using the same elements, copy and pasting them over to the artboards, you have the ability to move things around and refit them to the appropriate sizes. And then this really helps out in the development of the website, because now you have this responsive design that will move as you shrink or grow the screen size. So it's just one of these things that is something you'll use a lot. It's very important to know. And so I want to show you how to set that up. Now I'm going to be just using an image of a coffee, and we're going to do like we're giving 50% off coffees for a restaurant or a cafe. So you can use any image you want. You can follow along with this image. I'll provide it for you if you'd like to. And the first thing we need to do is we need to talk about dimensions and aspect ratio and resolution of an image. So the first thing is the dimension of the image. And that is basically the width horizontally and the height vertically of that image that makes up all those pixels. So if you look over in the document properties here, you can see that we have a width of 2,688 pixels and a height of 4,032 pixels. So this is a very large image. And if you look at the top tab, you'll see we're zoomed in to 16.7%. It also shows it in the bottom left-hand corner, 16.67%. So we're zoomed in quite a bit. Now, if we were to zoom in to 100%, you will see that we wouldn't even be able to fit the whole image on our page because it's such a large image. So even at 50%, we can see the sides, but we can't see the tops and bottoms. So we have to really zoom out to see this image. And that's okay. I want to start with a nice big image. I usually do that. I can shrink it down, and typically it's a little better to be able to shrink down an image than start with a low resolution or an image with a low dimensions and try to scale that up, because you see more pixelation happen when that occurs. So I like to start with a large image, and we are going to be creating artboards with different dimensions. And so one artboard might be a 1080 by 1080, like a square. Another artboard might be 1920 by 1080, which would be like a HD TV or a monitor. So it's important to know the width and height are your dimensions, and that creates what's called an aspect ratio. And that's just the ratio of numbers between the height and the width. And so a 1-to-1 aspect ratio would be a square. And when you use the aspect ratio terminology, it can be any number of pixels instead of declaring what the actual pixels are. So for instance, if you have a 1080 pixel by 1080 pixel image, that is a square. It's also a 1-to-1 aspect ratio because the sides are equal. If you have a 200 pixel image by 300 pixels, well, that would be a 2-to-3. And so you can use the aspect ratio to define the different dimensions. So the 1-by-1 might be scaled down to 500 by 500 or 250 by 250, but using the aspect ratio helps you understand the relationship between the width and the height. And then finally, we have the resolution. You can see the resolution is 72 pixels per inch, which is really good for any type of web work. Now, if you're working on an app or you're working on a website that really has good speed and high quality and things like that, you might get away with using a larger resolution. But typically, we stick around 72 pixels per inch for our resolution, and that just tells how many pixels are going to be in this image per every inch. And the lower the number, the more file space that we save. And that's very important for any kind of web design work. So it's kind of important to get used to those things and know what they are and know the terminology and how they work. So we're going to be creating an image for different social media platforms, and we need to know what the different platforms like as far as image sizes go. So I'm going to go over to Google Chrome and show you a couple different ways where you can find out this information. Now, the first way is just by going to a help desk or a help center of the actual platform if they provide the information. So here I'm on Facebook and I'm in their help center, and you can see under the photos and upload and edit photos section, there's a question: how can I make sure that my photos display in the highest possible quality? And they say we'll automatically resize and format your photos, which most platforms are going to do anyways. And then it says resize your photo to one of the following supported sizes: regular photos, 720 pixels, 960 pixels, or 2048 pixels wide. Now, they don't give a height requirement, but they are going to resize your image down to one of these sizes depending on how big it is. And cover photos is 851 pixels by 315, but we're just going to use a regular photo. And then it says to avoid compression when you upload your photo, make sure the file size is less than 100 kilobytes and save as a JPEG with an sRGB color profile. So typically, we use JPG or JPG files because they compress the file size down and save space. And so you can see they want a very small image size, otherwise they're going to compress it automatically for you. So if we try to keep our file size small, we use a smaller resolution and we use a JPEG compressed file format, then we should be able to meet the standards and not have any problems. Now, they didn't give us a dimensions for height, so we can just pick that. We could do 720 by 720 if we would like, or something of that nature. So I went over to Instagram, and you can see they also have a section that talks about it. So I'm in their Instagram help center. And they talk more about the aspect ratio, but they say when you share a photo that has a width between 320 and 1080 pixels, so if you have a width between these numbers, we keep that photo at its original resolution as long as the aspect ratio is in between these two numbers. So that means you could have a 2x2, 2x3, 3x4, or so forth. As long as they're in between this aspect ratio, you'll be okay. A height between 566 and 1350 pixels with a width of 1080. So this is saying that if you had a 1080 pixel image and you wanted a 4x5 aspect ratio, then the height would need to be 1350. So you can go to the individual websites and try to find this information. Now, I noticed I had a harder time finding it on a place like Pinterest. For some reason, they just don't obviously show it, and it was a little difficult for me to find it. So another thing you can do is you can just do a Google search for the most up-to-date social media platform image sizes, and you'll find a lot of listings. Now, what's important to keep in mind here is that these image sizes can change and have changed multiple times. Facebook has changed the way that their newsfeed works and the way that it looks, and throughout years they've actually changed the image size a bunch of different times. So even though that this might be the most current information at the time of this recording, you need to go and try to find the most current information for yourself at the time of watching this or working on this. Even today, when I go create something new, I got to double check just to make sure that it hasn't changed. One thing that you can do is you can look for an up-to-date guide. So Sprout Social is a pretty well-known and well-recognized brand. It's a great website, and they have this always up-to-date guide to social media image sizes. So if I scroll down here, you can see they've showed the last updated was October 1st, 2018. That's pretty current. If this was 2017, I might be a little worried because it could have changed in that time. And it could have changed since October. I'm recording in December, but that's pretty up to date. So we'll just stick with this. So we'll go down and you can see that they have social media image sizes per network. So we can click on Facebook. It'll take us down to the Facebook image size section and it'll give a couple different ones. So the first one's a profile picture. We don't care about that. Business page profile. We don't care about that one. The cover photo. We're not doing that right now. And here we go. Shared image, 1,200 pixels by 630. And so they tell you some of the guidelines. A shared image is one of the most common forms, and the guidelines recommended upload size of 1,200 by 630 will appear in feed at a max width of 470 pixels and on a page at 504. Now this is in a little bit contrast to what Facebook was saying here, that if you just had a regular photo that it might scale that for you. But I tend to stick with what Sprout Social says. I feel like they are pretty reputable and they keep up with this stuff pretty well. And so we're going to use their recommendations for the different graphics. Now you can go down and you can scroll through all of these. So there's Twitter and there's Pinterest and LinkedIn and all these wonderful platforms, and it'll give you detailed information about that. But if you go back up to the top, you will see that they have an easily reference the social media image size list and our always up-to-date Google Doc. So this is actually a link, and if you click on it, it's actually going to open up a Google document. It's actually a Google Sheet where they always update this information. And so they have some information here. Now they are trying to get you to sign up for some of their software and other things. I'm not an affiliate with them. I have no, representation of the company whatsoever. I just like using this program. So if you go down to the tabs at the bottom, we have Facebook here. And you can find a shared image on timeline. So there's that 1200 and 630 recommended dimensions. And then it doesn't have anything for minimum or maximum, and it shows you the image scale. So this is a 1.91 by 1 aspect ratio. Let's go back to Facebook. And I don't think they say that here. So I'm not sure where they get the information, but we're just going to go with their recommendation here. The process is going to be the same throughout. So you can use any resolution you want. I just want to show you how to find this information in the future in case you need it. So if we go over to Twitter, we can see in-stream photo recommended 506 by 253. That's a 2:1 aspect ratio, and they give you some other information like try to keep it under 5 megabytes and JPG, GIF, or PNG file. We'll do Instagram. Instagram, we can use a square size, so 1080 by 1080. They also like the 1.91 by 1 aspect ratio or up to a 4 by 5 as we mentioned. And we're going to do Pinterest because Pinterest is usually a longer image, and so we'll try one like that. So this one, pins expanded, 600 by 735. So those are the 4 that we'll just go ahead and create: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest, and we'll create a couple different varied sizes so you can see how this process works. Now, one more quick thing before we get started. If you have any interest in messing around with aspect ratios, you can use an aspect ratio calculator. So I use this one, which is pretty cool, from andrew.hedges.name/experiments/aspect_ratio. Just type in aspect ratio calculator in Google and look for the Andrew Hedges one. This is a really cool one. So here you can see we have a width of 1920 and a height of 1080. And then there's some common ratios. Now, this is outdated a little bit. You can see that it says iPhone 6. We're on the iPhone 10 now. So it's a little outdated, but it still works, and it works really well. So you can see when we plug this in, this aspect ratio is 16 by 9, and it gives us an example, which is really cool. So let's go ahead and change that 1080 by 1080. You can see that the aspect ratio is 1:1, and here we have an example. It's a square. So if you don't know what the aspect ratios are, you can plug them in. And you could also just plug in the aspect ratio into the width and height. So if I plug in 16 by 9, you'll see it's a 16 by 9 aspect ratio and give me an example. So like old, televisions were 4 by 3. So we can plug that in and see that is a little thinner than the 16:9 aspect ratio. And what's also cool is this will automatically calculate for you the width and height. So let's go back to 16:9 for a second. And typically we have 1920, and it calculates automatically for me the 1080. Let's just say that I know that I have to have a height of 720, which is pretty common. It's HD, but it's not 1080 HD. So let's just put in 720. Well, it'll calculate based on this aspect ratio, 16:9 or 1280 is what we need for a width. So it's really cool. If you know any of the numbers, the aspect ratio or the width and height, this calculator will help you calculate it automatically. And what's great about it is you don't have to hit a button. It just punches it in for you right away. So what we can do, let's delete these out, and we will punch in the ones that we have. So we know we had Facebook was 1200 by 630. Now it shows 40 by 21. I believe it's actually rounding it, because if you remember, it was 1.91 by 1, so that's kind of an awkward one. Let's try Twitter's and see what comes up. So 506 by 253. Just looking at those numbers, I would have never known that that was an aspect ratio of 2 by 1 without doing the math. So that's pretty cool, and it gives you an example. It's a nice, long, thin one. Let's do one more. Let's do the Pinterest one and see what it is. So this is a 40 by 49. It's probably another one that uses a decimal number, but it's rounding. Okay, so, but you can see that's a longer format. So we're going to do Facebook, which is a horizontal rectangle. We're going to do Twitter, which is another longer horizontal rectangle, 2 by 1. We're going to do Instagram at a square, so 1080 by 1080. And then we'll do this Pinterest one, 600 by 735. That's a little longer. And then you can see how we can set up these different dimensions and artboards and then recreate our graphic across those. So let's go ahead and hop over to Photoshop.